Episode 1. This is going to be a limited series. It's going to be 4 episodes. First episode is about being choosy. Right, and this is going to be the English version. And I'll try and see how this works. And then I'm going to try to do a Tagalog version after this. All right, so English version, let's go ahead and start with being choosy. Right, so the second episode is going to be go na, as in in Tagalog, go na. And then third episode's gonna be here na me, and then fourth episode's gonna be uwi na mi. Right, and as we go along this limited series, you're gonna sort of understand why I've titled the episodes in such a way. All right, so first episode, Choosy, and we're gonna be talking about the journey of becoming an OFW. So the first step is always, when you're still in the Philippines and you're looking at should you be an OFW and what are the pros and cons, you're evaluating, you're researching where you want to go, what kind of job you're looking at, you're evaluating your life, you're thinking about is this really something that you want to do? You probably listen to some of your friends, colleagues, families who have, you know, told you about stories of themselves going abroad, working abroad, and so on and so forth. So I suppose that nudged you to do a little bit of research, and hopefully that led you to this series. Right. So again, first episode, what it is that I think you should be thinking about or considering when you're doing your research, and when you start to do your application process, when you're applying for jobs, and then when you get an offer, there's a couple of things that I think you should take note of. And hopefully before, and not hopefully, I would actually recommend you do your research first. And on YouTube there's actually a lot of OFWs recording vlogs about what are the average pay, what the cost of living are, what their journey is, how they did it, things that you should be looking out for, and so on and so forth. I've watched a lot of them actually, and by watching all of those, which I again recommend you do that first, and then just come back to this episode, because all of those vlogs actually have a common theme. It's about how to apply, basic questions of some of I've seen some doing on basic questions on interviews, the types of jobs that you can find in a certain country, in a certain city, if you need an agency, and what the cost of living is, how much it costs to get a room, a flat, a house, a villa, and so on and so forth, electricity, groceries, and so on and so forth. So it's readily available, and some of them are quite fun actually. So I definitely would recommend you go to YouTube and hit up a few of those logs. And once you've gotten your fill and you now have a good understanding of what the average salary is, probably of that particular destination that you're looking at, that particular job, what the cost of living is for that particular country again, then I'd recommend you go through this episode, right? So the things I'm going to be discussing are the couple of things that most of these vlogs and most of the research that you might be doing on Google would not normally include. And that's because they don't want to include it. But I guess when an OFW or someone has you know finished the initial process of becoming an OFW, and learning all of this stuff along the way, wherein some people are lucky that some of their friends or family or somebody in that country would help them out and teach them all this stuff once they get there. It becomes pretty normal, and it becomes something that is expected. So we kind of, being from outside, being an OFW myself, you kind of don't think and that it's something that you should be sharing, because most of the time people in the Philippines are only really focused on, before they become an OFW, are really only focused on what the salary is and what the cost of living is. So yeah, there's a couple of stuff. And firstly, I want to highlight that when you're applying or when you're targeting a particular country or city, um, when for a particular job to become an OFW, I think you should also do a bit of research for that country. When I say research, which I'm sure you've probably already done, I think you should take particular keen interest on the tax rate. So a lot of the material available on the internet, blogs, websites, podcasts, and so on and so forth, would typically miss out on highlighting tax, especially income tax. So you should hit up the um, BIR equivalent on that particular country. So in the US it's IRS, in Singapore it's forgot IRAS, yeah, and then other countries have their own equivalent as well. So you should hit up the website for that. And then two things. One is you should look at what is the income tax rate, if there is. Some countries and jurisdictions don't have income tax. And secondly, who would be covered for that particular tax. So when I say who would be covered, usually it means the are you going to be classified as a tax resident if you're going to be working in that country or city or jurisdiction. So for example, I know that in Dubai there's no income tax, so that's perfect. But hopefully you've already done your research and you found out that okay, there's no income tax, so there's nothing to consider because the income tax, it will eat away from it will take away money from your income. So when employers give you an offer, it's usually net, and a lot of the countries do not withhold tax. So it's not like in the Philippines wherein when they tell you this is the salary, you kind of already know that the tax is 20%, 30%, depending if you have a dependent, for example, if you have a wife, kids, or your mom or dad not working. So you kind of already know. So in some countries, and especially the country you're targeting, you gotta know if they have income tax. You gotta know what the tax rate is, and you have to know if you're gonna be covered by that. In most cases, you might be. Right. So in some countries, some OFWs who are doing contract work, they might not be covered. So that's why I'm saying do a bit of research. For example, if you're going to be on contract, say factory worker, for example, in a certain country, it's fixed contract. I think there's already bilateral agreements and there's already um, tax incentives for these companies and for the workers as well. So some of them don't have to pay tax. But in some countries, or even if in that country and you're not covered by that particular bilateral agreement or something, then you might still be covered by tax. So that's why I'm saying make sure you research what is the tax regimen in that particular country, right? So usually in the US, they do withhold tax. So when you do your research, you'll understand that they do withhold tax and they compute tax a little bit differently, a lot differently because there's multiple taxes. So the federal government will have a tax, and then the state will have a tax, and then your municipal or your city will have a tax as well, and then you got your social security, on so on and so forth. That would all be withheld from your pay. There's also going to be a process of filing your tax, and then some will get. There's going to be techniques on how to get tax refunds and so on and so forth. In Singapore, in Hong Kong, they don't withhold the tax, so it's your responsibility to pay the tax during tax filing season. And they work a little bit differently, but in most cases, tax residents would be individuals who work in that current country for at least half a year in most cases that I know of. So in Hong Kong, it's the same. If you work for half of the year, you'd be considered as a resident. So in such a case, you are liable to pay income tax, the same as in Singapore. So again, there's the tax filing season at the end, usually at the end or towards the middle. at the beginning or towards the middle of the following year. So you're going to be taxed for the preceding year. So, for example, this year, the year has just begun. So the tax filing in Singapore would be around April, and we need to be you then need to pay the tax around June, if I'm not mistaken. Now, the good thing here in Singapore is that the employer will file a tax on your behalf, and then you just need to review that, and then you have to make sure that all the deductibles are already there. And again, in some countries there's no deductibles. I think in Canada, if I'm not mistaken, it doesn't matter. It's really based on salary, and they take away some stuff, but it's not like you get extra deductions if you have a wife that's not working, a kid, and so on and so forth. Well, I might be wrong, but that's from my initial research. But again, each country is different, so that's why I would recommend really take a look at how the income tax works. Okay, so number one, take a look at what the tax regimen is. So aside from income tax, there might be other taxes. So once you've done your research and once you've done your reading, most of the time, and most of the Filipinos who become an OFW are actually going to Western countries, or a lot more progressive countries than the Philippines. So their tax revenue agencies or departments would actually possibly have ways to contact. So usually it's email. So shoot up an email and just say, "Hey, I'm going to be working there, and I'm Philippine national, and whatever. I'm going to be a permanent resident, whatever it is." And then you say, "Okay, I need to know what are the tax considerations." And most of these governments actually are happy to answer that, because it's you're going to be paying taxes to them, so you're the customer basically. So yeah, again, number one to highlight is tax. Make sure you um, do a bit of research on what the tax implications are when you work in that country. And once you know that, then when you're being offered a package, a salary, a job, a role, then you have a better idea of what your take home pay is, right? And then you can apply what you've learned from the other vlogs and other websites about what the cost of living is in that particular country or city, right? So don't forget that. And just case in point is Hong Kong. They do their computations a bit different. Wherein, so for example, if I started work last year, and so around this time I'm supposed to be doing my filing. So when I file, and then they then give me they didn't give me a statement on what I need to pay. It if this is Since this is my first year, this is my first time to pay tax. What they're gonna do is I have to pay tax for my last year's income, and I have to pay in advance this year's tax based on last year's tax. So next year, so I actually basically gonna be in Hong Kong. At the first instance, I'm gonna be taxed twice in my first year, in my first tax filing. It's just how it works, because they tax in advance there, so 1 year in advance. Well, on the flip side, the good thing is that if when you do leave Hong Kong, if you do leave, then you can actually get a tax refund because you paid in advance, right? So they're gonna recompute that, and so on and so forth. But again, if you did not know that, then it's gonna hit you really big, because most likely you're not prepared that you're gonna be taxed double in the first instance. So yeah, again, just to highlight how important tax is, and tax is not something that you want to mess with, because it is the government's revenue. And being an OFW, and especially if you're not permanent resident yet, um, you don't want to give the host country any excuses to make your life harder, right? You want to make sure, when in Rome, again, you got to make sure that you follow the rules, right? So number one is tax. Second, insurance. Now a lot of the companies and Western countries that OFWs go to, their companies actually already would include insurance in their package. However, what I want to highlight is that insurance is actually limited. So I would recommend you read through the coverage of that insurance. All right. So two things. First is, are you okay with that coverage? Right? Because different insurance policies for different types of roles, different types of companies, and so on and so forth. It's not standard. So some might only cover you X amount, some would cover for dental, some would not, and so on and so forth. So make sure you know what your coverage is, so that if you're not happy with that or you're not comfortable with that, either you negotiate the offer, or you can purchase an additional insurance to top up whatever's missing or whatever you want added. Right? So that's very important. And I just want to highlight how important it is. You are going to be an OFW. You are going to be in that country on your own, right? Even if you're with your wife and your kids, if you're migrating together with your family, you're on your own, basically. And if God forbid, something happens medically, what you don't want to happen is that aside from stressing out on your physical health, you're also stressing out on how to cover and where to get the money as well. So that's why I want to make sure that you know what your insurance coverage is, and you got to make sure that you are buffered and prepared. So either you get additional insurance coverage, or you save up a certain amount just to make sure that in the eventuality you get something, right? Because no one's going to help you, and I'm sure you're gonna hear that from all the vlogs, and read it from all the websites. As an OFW, no one's gonna help you. You're on your own. So you gotta make sure you're sufficiently covered, right? Not just by your company's insurance, but you got your own. You gotta make sure that you are covered. Secondly, life insurance, right? Could be term and could go and so forth. But the point is, it has different names or terminologies per country, per jurisdiction, and so forth. But I want to highlight that you should get an insurance to make sure that if something happens to you, again, God forbids, if you die, if you get an accident, if it's permanent or temporary disability, we are overseas because we need to send money back home. So if you get sick, and not just sick, I mean, if you get temporary permanent disability, or if you die, what happens to your family, right? So we got to think about that. So even if you're starting off and you don't have that much money, I think you should make sure that you have the most basic coverage of debt. At least you should get debt coverage, um, permanent and temporary disability. Disability. Total. I forgot what it's called, but again, different countries. But anyways, there's a disability wherein it's not total disability, partial disability, something. So let's say you lose a finger, for example, or two fingers. So you're still okay. I can probably still work, but that is a disability. So at least you get something. Or your total disability is like you lose an arm, you lose an egg, for example. That means you won't be able to work, for the most part. So you got to make sure that you're insured, right? So what if you die, God forbid? What happens to your family? And then you say, well, again, some companies would cover that as well, but you got to know how much that is, because you got to compute how much your earning potential is for your life, your planned timeline on how long you want to be an OFW. So if you want to be an OFW for 20 years, you're gonna compute what the earning potential is, and in the first instance, what if you die in the middle? Because nobody knows, right? So that's why it's insurance. So we make sure that you're covered, and your family back home gets the due amount, right? So again, even if you don't get the full coverage that you would want, start small. Just as soon as you land, as soon as you start your job in that country, get insurance. And I would actually recommend get the insurance in the country where you're working, because aside from the insurance in the Philippines, the insurance premiums are absolutely crazy, way over the roof. Mainly because there's a competition on how you do the premium computation. It's based on how many people are getting insured and so on and so forth. So there's not a lot of people in the Philippines who get insured. So it's not the market isn't that big enough. So that's why everybody has to pay a larger premium. And for a separate topic, I think the government of the Philippines should make sure that everybody should take up insurance coverage. But anyways, I digress. Again, get insurance in the country where you're working, because that's where you're working anyways. Plus, it's most probably going to be a lot cheaper, with a much larger coverage, right? So get insurance. Now, I can't stress that enough. Take a look at the tax rate, and then insurance, right? Medical insurance when you get sick, and then life insurance. So again, you don't need to take up the full life. Just take up the term insurance. Just for the term on when you are working in that country. So if you have a contract for 1, 2, 3 years, then get a term insurance for 3 years while you're working, right? can do that. So and then you pay a lower premium, but you get high coverage, and you got peace of mind that if something ever happens to you, God forbid, your family's going to be well taken care of, right? And even if your company has coverage for that eventuality, once you get extra, then your family's going to get more, right? And then that, just for myself, I have I'm pretty happy to know that if something happens to me, God forbid, my wife and my kids are going to be set for life. They don't have to work, right? Because if you think about it, if you don't have that and something happens to you, what happens to your family, right? Where are you going to get the money, right? So I can't stress enough: get insurance, right? Um, Third thing you should take a look at is that when you're researching the cost of living, um, I think Filipinos tend to equate it to Philippine peso, and I would actually just discourage you from doing that. Do not convert it at all, right? So when somebody tells you on a vlog or when you read it in an article or something that a rental for a flat costs 2,000 USD, then look at it as 2,000 USD. Once you convert it into peso, then your base point of comparison is already in peso. Wherein that's wrong because you are not in the Philippines. You're going to be in that country. So you have to make sure that you stick with that currency. It's the same as when people have a hard time with jet lag. Wherever you're going to, when you have if you don't want to have jet lag or reduce the effects, whenever you're going to, when you start your journey, you already set your body and your watch to that time zone, to that particular time, so that you're ready to be adjusted and your mindset is adjusted. It's the same with taking a look at the salary and the cost of living, right? So for both the salary and the cost of living, when they give you the offer and they tell you the salary is this much, and then you research the cost of living, always base it on the baseline, which is what is the cost of living in that country. So there's a lot of websites that provide you with that information. So for example, one good indication is, I think it's pretty well known in the internet, is the McDonald's index, wherein there's prices for how much a Big Mac is in the different countries. So that gives you a good idea, right? You can compare it already with when somebody offers you gives you an offer of a salary of $2,000, and when you look at the Big Mac index, and you know that Big Mac in the U.S. costs about 250, for example, then you get a better idea, a better comparison of how far that $2,000 will get you, right? Plus you couple it with the tax, of course. So let's say, for example, if I'm in the U.S., somebody offers me $2,000, tax rate is 20%, 25%, then and I know that the Big Mac's about 250, then based on your research, you got to do rent for about 400 bucks. Then you kind of already have an idea that okay, even if this job I can do this job, and even if I convert this, if it's remaining $200, it's still a lot of money if you convert to Philippine peso. But when you're in that country, you s- it's not gonna work, right? So make sure that when you're writing down and noting down values, don't convert it to peso. Stick with the currency, and especially for the salary, remuneration, and the benefits, as well as the actual cost of living. The other thing you should consider is the actual quality of life as well. So, what is the quality of life in that country, in that city? Um, it's not might not be as important, but I think some people are picky. Some people are not emotionally ready as well. So it would be good to to extend your research on the quality of life in that country or and that city or country or location, whatever it is, right? So, for example, are there malls there? Are there beaches? What's the flats look like? How do they look like? How big are the average flats? What's the average salary for a local citizen for that country, for example? That will give you a better idea of where you stand, right? So if the offer that you're getting is a lot lower than the average salary of a local citizen, then I actually would highlight that that's something that you should really really consider if you need to take it. Because if it's a lot lower than the average salary of a local citizen who's got a lot of emotional support because they live there, they got friends, they got family, they already probably have a house from their parents, When you go there, you don't have all of that, and you're already at a disadvantage because your salary is a lot lower than what somebody who has all of that already, is there, is getting. So always take a look at, um, all of the stuff I'm telling you. And then, if you bring your family, with you as well, take a look at schools. A lot of the information on the internet doesn't really, especially from coming from OFWs, there's not a lot of OFWs who are able to bring the families. But if you're able to, then, take a look at, what are the activities for the families, how much the cost is for school as well, to put your child in the school, and, additional costs for having kids and maintaining, your lifestyle, and so on and so forth. So those are pretty minor stuff, but I think you should know as well, because in some locations schools are massively expensive, to the point that I know that a couple of expat families actually return, their wives and their kids actually return to the Philippines because the schools are just massively expensive and they just can't cover that, right? So, that's another thing to consider. So once you know all of that stuff, when you get an offer and you're doing your negotiation, then you know where your baseline is, because you need to cover that cost, and you can share it with the company that's, giving you an offer for a job. You can say, hey, this is my baseline cost. I won't be able to go down because I gotta work and have my family here, right? Pretty important stuff, right? One would think. And, what else? Yeah, you should when you're doing your research as well. So most of the information available is, when you're already have a job in that country or city. So they would, most of the information provided to you would be, okay, what is the monthly, rent, for example? What is the monthly internet cost? What is the monthly water bills, utility bills, and so on and so forth. However, um, you would still need actually a bit of money for the initial, setting yourself up when you go to that country. So of course, some companies, when they offer you a job, they might not include, expatriation and repatriation, for example. So basically, you have to pay for your own way to get there. Plus, when you're renting a place, a flat, a room, bed space, whatever it is, usually there will be commission fees for the agent. There will be, deposits, advance payments. Some countries, I know in Dubai, you have to pay 1 year upfront, or 6 months upfront, or 3 months upfront. So you got to be ready for that, because if you're not ready for that financially, and on your mind, you don't know about that, then where you're going to live, then you won't have a choice. Then you're going to be, backed up against the wall, and you'll have to choose the ones that you don't really want and need, just because you're not prepared for it, right? So make sure you include in your consideration, and your thinking, when you're doing your negotiation, your planning, and your preparation, how much it will cost you, and how much you need to prepare, just to set yourself up, in the first month or two. Also, you got to understand, when you do your research, what is the pay frequency, what is the salary payment frequency of that particular country or company. In the Philippines, the pay period is actually every 15 days. In the US, it's kind of the same thing. However, I do know that, depending on the job and the company, some get paid weekly, some get paid once a month. In Hong Kong and Singapore, and I know in Dubai as well, they get paid once a month. In Europe, and so on and so forth. So you gotta understand, and you gotta know what the pay period is, and make your calculations, because, you might be expecting to get the full pay, a full month's pay on your first pay, but depends on when you start, and depends on when the pay period is. You might not get anything. So there's also cut-off as well. So for example, I'll give you a good example. First time I came over, I was informed the pay, the monthly pay comes on the 20th. I started on the 15th, I think, if I'm not mistaken, or 10th, or something around that figure, around that time. And then, unfortunately, the cutoff was also 10. So I was expecting to get, salary on the 20th, but it didn't come. And so when I asked, and they said, "Oh, the cutoff is actually the 10th, so you're gonna get your salary next month." So that meant I did not have any salary for that month. So I had to extend, my the small amount that I had to the next month. So that actually meant that that the first pay was actually going to be in the second month of from when I started. So you could just imagine how that's going to impact you financially. So be prepared for that. That's a pretty important thing. Got to really be prepared for that, right? And then what else? Yeah, types. Yeah, visa. Yeah, I think we should stop from there. It's already 30 minutes long. There's a couple more stuff I've noted down as well for this episode, but I might do it in the Tagalog version. If there's, if you guys want to listen to more to this in English, maybe I'll add I have five, six more items I wanted to talk about, but I think 30 minutes way too long for a podcast. Anyways, so yeah, happy to share all this stuff. So I'll post this on YouTube as well. Have a good one, guys. See you in the second episode. Second episode is Gona, and I'm sure you kind of already understand by now why I titled this episode Choosy, and the second episode is Gona, and the third episode would be Here to Me. Right? See you guys.